Welcome to the Center Square Radio Hour for the final weekend of September 2024. I'm your host, Chris Krug. The Center Square, the Radio Hour, are projects of the Franklin News Foundation, a 501c3, independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan news service. Established in 2019, the Center Square Newswire publishes original taxpayer-centered straight news that focuses on the size, scope, and effectiveness of local, state, and federal government. On the Center Square Radio Hour, our journalists explore their top stories, adding insight to the headlines. We'll also present thoughts on the economy from Dr. Warfate Ibangi, PhD economist, and bring you the latest in K-12 education news for our Franklin News Foundation's Chalkboard News team. Today, we'll look at the charges against Ryan Wesley Routh for attempted assassination of former President Trump. We hear about differing state policies on non-citizen voting, and we'll discuss the latest on the presidential race. We'll be right back with all that and more in the Center Square Radio Hour.
Are you tired of news that puts politics over people? At the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation, we believe in putting people over politics by delivering nonpartisan news and audio content that serves you, the American taxpayer. With Franklin News Foundation, you can read fact-based, state-focused news for free at thecentersquare.com. You can listen to civil, balanced conversations between policy experts through our podcast network at americastalking.com. Or you can get in-depth news on K-12 education spending, curriculum, and school safety at chalkboardnews.com. It's all free through Franklin, where we put you, the American taxpayer, first in every story, episode, and conversation. And it's only possible through our supporters. Together, we can produce content that puts people over politics and brings Americans the news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate. Once again, that's franklinnews.org/donate.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer. And I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the Center Square's reporting zeroes in on state authorities publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. The Center Square gives power to the taxpayer by tracking politicians' use of the people's money and demanding transparency from state-run agencies. This is how the Center Square equips you, the American taxpayer, to hold your state government accountable. Sign up now for your state's Center Square newsletter at thecentersquare.com.
Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. With more on the federal charges for the assassination attempt against former President Trump, it's Dan McCaleb.
Federal prosecutors secured an indictment this week in the second assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. The indictment charges Ryan Wesley Routh with the attempted assassination, forcible assaulting and interfering with a Secret Service agent, and gun-related counts. The new charges come as the U.S. Senate released a scathing report on U.S. Secret Service failures in the first assassination attempt on the former president. Joining me to discuss this is Casey Harper, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Center Square. Casey, let's start with the indictment. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of concern about initially that Routh was not, maybe he wouldn't be charged with the right thing because the first charges that came through were smaller gun charges. But we see here that those concerns were actually just part of the sort of the legal process working out, and looks like Routh, the would-be assassin, is going to face some real charges here. Of course, that's such an interesting would-be assassin. I mean, there's a lot of levels to it. I mean, we've talked on this program before, Dan, about how he could have possibly known that Trump was at the golf course at that time. Raises questions about whether he had somehow obtained some information, whether that person knowingly was an accomplice or whether they were unwittingly an accomplice, of course. But was he working with anyone? Not saying he was, but Iran's Ayatollah released videos about Trump's assassination, essentially threatening to assassinate former President Donald Trump, who's now survived his second assassination attempt. So we see these are real meteor charges against Routh. I think is what people wanted, what people expected, kind of going to work its way through the legal process now. But what people are looking forward now, I mean, what's going to happen? We saw that the House and the Senate passed legislation this week to increase Secret Service protection for Trump and Vance. Really, it would be for all, nominees for president and vice president going forward, which of course Trump and Vance fit that bill. So, we're going to see, it looks like, assuming Biden signs it, and I think he will, he said the Secret Service that need more help. With Biden's signature, we're going to see more protection for Trump, but it's still unsettling, Dan, even as we see some of, a report come out this week about the failings of the Secret Service. It's unsettling that we've already had 2. And I wrote about assassination attempts, and I actually wrote about a poll this week that said most Americans, Dan, expect, sadly, another attempt on Trump's life before Election Day.
It is a crazy, sad story. Sticking with the indictment, Casey, the attempted assassination charge comes with the potential sentence, if convicted, of life imprisonment. Trump just last week blasted federal prosecutors for having only, up until that point, charged him with a couple of gun crimes, which, of course, did not come with the potential for life imprisonment. But now we have those charges. The judge in the case ordered Routh to be held without bond in a federal prison in Florida. So we're not going to, he won't be released anytime soon. Anything else to add to that?
He left a note, of course. He offered $150,000 to anyone who could, quote, finish the job. His lawyer is trying to say, this was just a publicity stunt. That's kind of the defense that's being chalked up now. But we know he did have a weapon. He waited, according to his cell phone records, for 12 hours at that chain link fence in the sniper's nest. So, I don't know. There's going to be much patience for that argument.
Well, let's move on to the Senate report that was released this week, Casey. It was a bipartisan report. This was not, Democrats or Republicans or whatever. It was a bipartisan report out of the Senate that really was damning for the U.S. Secret Service, all their significant failures in protecting the former president during this July event, the first assassination attempt that happened at a Trump campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. You wrote about that report. Casey, tell us about it.
Yeah, as one Democratic lawmaker called it, a stunning failure. As you pointed out, bipartisan condemnation of the Secret Service. Of course, the head of the Secret Service resigned earlier this year in the aftermath of that first assassination attempt, which was widely criticized. When I talked to security experts who were flabbergasted, couldn't understand how the Secret Service could have messed up so badly. And this report, Dan, I read through it, and it's pretty amazing. Some of the things are small but important, such as the radios weren't really working that day. They couldn't get them working, but that wasn't even a one-off. The agents, they were kind of used to the radios not working or having issues. And so it's not like, oh, wow, the radios didn't work that day. How unfortunate. It's like, no, your radios never worked, and you knew that, and you didn't take the proactive steps to fix them, right? Or to fix the problem. So they're having radio issues. They really didn't have the right meetings or planning that they were supposed to. They did not coordinate well, according to the report, with local law enforcement. And it looks like that communication, especially between local law enforcement and Secret Service agents, was not good. And there's kind of a stunning paragraph, Dan. This really shocked to me. And I'll read from the report. It says, approximately 2 minutes before shots were fired, the U.S. Secret Service security room located on the rally grounds was told that there was an individual on the roof of the building. Shortly before shots were fired, a Secret Service counter sniper observed local officers running towards the same building with guns drawn. And so, 2 minutes is a lifetime in a situation like this, Dan. And not only did they not fire on the shooter, you could maybe make a case that we can't just fire on someone because they look suspicious, but they could have got Trump off the stage, right? There was no reason for Trump to stay out on that stage. If you have police who are concerned enough to be sprinting to the shooter with guns drawn, then that's more than enough to get Trump off stage, and they simply didn't do it. And
of course, there's also concerns that the Secret Service, part of the Department of Homeland Security, hasn't been forthcoming with information about its planning, about its execution of its plan on that day. So I would expect more government hearings, more congressional hearings, Casey, and perhaps more new evidence about the Secret Service failures. But that is all the time we have. Thank you for joining us today, Casey. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Big thanks to Dan and Casey. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on states' different approaches to non-citizen voting, it's Eliana Carnodal.
Conversations about non-citizen voting are growing louder as some states begin legislative efforts before the November election. Joining me with more on this story is the Center Square's Shirlene Guerra. Shirlene, there are some federal laws governing non-citizen voting. Could you outline those?
Yeah, so I think it's important to point out that while Congress did pass the legislation in 1996, while the federal law states that it's unlawful for non-citizens to vote in federal elections, it didn't speak to any local or state level. So now we have a confusion going on. And actually, all state constitutions mention that United States citizenship when discussing who can vote in a state's election. In 43 states, the constitutional language just goes over who can vote. Like an example is they say every citizen or all citizens, but none of them state that non-citizens can't vote.
But so the national law, as of right now, specifically just applies to certain national offices?
Yeah. So as it states, no non-citizen can vote in any federal elections. And so where the confusion is coming from is the trickling throughout the states of what can and cannot be done.
Okay. And there's been some recent efforts to change that on the national level that hasn't really gotten anywhere. Can you tell us about that?
The SAVE Act, which I know everyone is aware what the SAVE Act is, or they've heard about it, especially lately. The SAVE Act, it passed by a vote of 221 to 198 with, Democrats crossing lines to support the measure, but then it stalled in Senate, and then that's why you see it trying to get, when it was trying to get locked in with the new continuing resolution before that was, pushed out as well. So there are things that, and states are doing more, to fix this situation as well.
Can we get into that a little bit more? Which states have laws on this? Which states are working towards that? What's the kind of landscape there?
So there are 6 states right now that have already approved the ballot measures related to citizen requirements when voting. But the ballot measures in 2024 are in Idaho, Oklahoma, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, Kentucky, South Carolina, North Carolina. But the state constitutions who explicitly prohibit non-citizen voting are just Arizona, Colorado, North Dakota, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, and Ohio. So that's where the verbiage states, they just prohibit the non-citizen voting in state and local elections.
And what's been kind of the conversation around this as far as arguments for and against these laws designed to limit non-citizen voting?
Yeah, and so I think that is actually also where it's interesting because in certain jurisdictions, they do permit local elections, like Maryland and Vermont. They do allow non-citizens to vote in certain elections on that local level. But in California, I mean, they've had some pushback here and there, but it's even states in San Francisco on their website that non-citizen parents of children residing in, that area, they are fully permitted to vote on Board of Education elections, that involves the school system. But non-citizens are still not permitted to vote in any of their local or state or federal elections. And, I think a lot of the point for the arguments that are against non-citizen voting is, you have things like, voter fraud, which could be anywhere from, illegal aliens, voting, or you could have things like ineligible voters. So I think those things lead into the bigger picture where, I think it was Speaker Johnson who stressed the point that thousands and thousands of illegal voter registrations are on there right now, which led to, audits.
Yeah, a handful of states have done audits of their voter rolls and removed people. It's kind of been an ongoing process. What states have done that and what have they found?
I do think that the state that sticks out to me would be Oklahoma because they've just been more vocal about it just, recently. and putting forth an effort of trying to, get other, they have their own task force, and they have certain things that they're urging other states to do when it comes to their audit thing. And I do think it's important whenever you look at those things and the steps that other states are going through, and then they're seeing results. So I do think that over 450,000 ineligible voters in one state since 2020-21, I do think we'll see more audits coming in the future as well.
Well, Shirlene, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Thanks, Eliana and Shirlene. You've been listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on the presidential race, we'll go back to Dan McCaleb.
We are less than 6 weeks from the November 5th presidential election, and early voting has begun in a number of states, including my home state of Illinois. Polling shows the race remains incredibly tight. Joining me to discuss the race today is Casey Harper, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Center Square. Casey, with voting already underway in a number of states, about 6 weeks out, this may sound cliche, but in this election, every vote very much could count, particularly in the swing states. You wrote about some of these tight polls this week. What do they show?
Yeah, I mean, we're really coming down to it, Dan, and cliche or not, some of these races that we're seeing in swing states are incredibly close, and the candidates know it. The money's going there at the polls. I'm checking the polls constantly, and we can talk about some of them, but they show within all these swing states, Dan, that they're within the margin of error. It's not like Trump is winning half of them and Harris is winning the other half, so it's a tight race. No, all the swing states are within the margin of error, which can be sometimes a few thousand votes. I mean, we're talking in some cases 0.1%. I think the greatest one that I saw recently was like 1.9% lead, which is still, again, within the normal margin of error. So these states are all toss-ups. It's going to be incredibly close. We do have some big, a few big landmarks coming up. We have Vance and Walz, the respective VP candidates, a debate scheduled on Tuesday. I think that has the potential to be pretty consequential for the race, just because for so many people, Vance and Walz are unknown quantities. They're undefined. They're not nearly as popular of course, as Trump is, and as well as Kamala. So those introductions and first impressions can make a big impact on the vibe of the campaign. I personally believe Harris has a little bit more to lose with that debate, because Walz, we'll see how he does. I think he comes across as a bit odd. And Harris has a little more positive momentum that Walz could let the air out of that balloon. Now, Vance is a good debater, and he is more of a known quantity. So he's a little bit more known. He's a little bit more controversial, but people know who he is. So I think Walz has the potential to make a good or a bad first impression and keep the momentum going or lose the momentum for Harris's campaign.
I'll certainly be tuning in Tuesday night to that with the one and only debate between the vice presidential picks. Of course, as of right now, there's only been one debate between former President Trump and Vice President Harris. Harris has agreed to a CNN-sponsored debate. Trump so far has not. The first debate between the two, most critics across the country said it was on ABC that the moderators were biased against Trump and for Harris, constantly fact-checking Trump, not fact-checking Harris. So I can understand Donald Trump's reservations. But going back to the Vance-Walz debate, which is this coming Tuesday, I'm interested. I'll be tuning in. I don't necessarily agree with you, though, that it could swing the election. I don't know that too many voters vote based on who the vice presidential candidate is. Push back on me there.
Well, Dan, as always, I'll be happy to tell you why you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, of course, the VP is not as important as a presidential. If this race was clearly going one way or the other, I'd probably agree with you. But right now, because the race is so close, I think there's something to be said. If it moves the needle in one swing state by 1 point, that could be the difference for that entire state. It could change the momentum. It could change the narrative. Trump has been on kind of a bad streak momentum-wise after his performance in the last debate, which you referenced. It was widely considered that he did not do well. And also, I'll just say that, this is a big night for Vance, because Vance has the opportunity to inherit the America First mantle from Trump. And, it's very realistic, Dan, that we could see Vance running for president in 2028. Trump has recently come out and said he will not run again in 2028 if he does not win. So not to get too far ahead, but we're probably looking at a very possible presidential nominee, even future president potentially, who is the most likely one to inherit the America First movement. He's very young. He could carry that mantle for a long time. So it's going to be really important to see how he does on the debate stage. I've seen, there's been a lot made of his media interviews. I think he's done very well handling, CNN and other testy interviews in a good way. He has some controversial past comments that have come back to bite him, but recently he's done well under pressure. I don't know how well it's going to do on this national stage. I don't think anyone does. Maybe it won't swing the election, but I'd say since the race is so close, anything counts right now.
Casey, in the last minute or so that we have, some pretty big developments this week in a somewhat related story, the two assassination attempts on former President Trump. One, prosecutors finally charged the second suspect with the attempted assassination charges. The second, the U.S. Senate released a scathing bipartisan report on the Secret Service actions in the first assassination attempt. Do you think that has any bearing on how voters who they're select at the polls?
I think it does. It does. It may not make sense why, because it doesn't change anyone's policies. But you saw it after the first assassination attempt. It was huge for Trump, although it was quickly sort of swept under the rug by all the chaos with Harris replacing Biden as the nominee. But Elon Musk came out and endorsed Trump immediately after that assassination because he was so moved by how Trump responded. And I think a lot of people were moved by how Trump showed a sort of bravery and I don't know what you want to call it, tenacity, masculine courage, something, when he said fight, 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 when the shooter was still, potentially out there. So I think that was a big moment for him. I think Trump does well anytime the story is about him all the time. That is how Trump thrives. That is how Trump wins. It's how he controls the narrative when the stories are about him. That's how he won in 2016. He controlled the cycle, and the media, as they talk about him, they promote him, they remind people of him. And I think Trump sometimes does better when other people talk about him than when he speaks for himself, right? So that's why the surrogates have also been so important. So I think it helps with enthusiasm. It also fits Trump's narrative, his theme that he is the one taking on the establishment for the American people. If Trump is the last line of defense in his world between the globalist democratic agenda and the average American, and that's why they're trying to take him out, and you're next. That's kind of Trump's message. And so every assassination attempt just kind of reinforces that idea. Of course, we don't want that to ever be a part of our politics. And hopefully, the Senate and House just passed more protection for Trump. That's a good thing. I hope he is safe. There was Democrats and Republicans supported that unanimously. So hopefully we don't have to have another assassination segment, Dan.
Hopefully not, Casey. Thank you for joining us. Listeners can keep up with all election-related stories at thecentersquare.com.
Thanks to Dan and Casey for that update. That'll do it for the first half of the Center Square Radio Hour. After the break, we'll look at more top stories from across the nation. How has California's fast food minimum wage law impacted employment numbers in the state? What concerns surround the popular app Goth AI? And how would tariffs on China impact U.S. consumers? All that and more when we return on the Center Square Radio Hour. Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. Here are this week's quick hits, some of the original reporting you may have missed at centersquare.com. Last week, the U.S. House passed a bill to deport foreign nationals convicted of domestic violence and sex-related crimes, including offenses against children. While the bill saw bipartisan support, most Democrats, 158 of them, voted against it. The bill would update the Immigration and Nationality Act to make individuals convicted of crimes such as stalking, child abuse, and sex offenses inadmissible and deportable. It also includes violations of protective orders and harassment as grounds for deportation. An app called Hots and Cots is allowing U.S. service members to anonymously share photos of poor conditions in military barracks and dining facilities. Images posted include mold, mice, maggots, cockroaches, brown tap water, and broken AC units. Founder Rob Evans created the app more than a year ago after a congressional watchdog called attention to longstanding problems with housing for junior enlisted service members. He said the goal is to push the U.S. Department of Defense to improve conditions, something it promised to do after the 2023 report. Hamilton County's Board of Commissioners reviewed a $1.25 billion proposal to renovate the Cincinnati Bengals Paycor Stadium, with the team's current lease set to expire in 2026. Built in 1997, the stadium's original agreement had county taxpayers covering 95% of those costs through a half-cent sales tax. Board President Alicia Reese pointed out that the city currently pays for the stadium's utilities, while the Bengals keep the revenue. The team has 5 two-year options to extend the lease if exercised a year before it ends. A group of New York nuns is urging the U.S. Supreme Court to block a New York regulation requiring faith-based organizations to cover abortions in their employee health insurance plans. In a filing Tuesday, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of New York joined a coalition of Anglican and Catholic nuns, churches, and faith-based social ministries in petitioning justices to take up the case, arguing their policy violates religious beliefs and constitutional rights. The 2017 rule from the New York State Department of Financial Services prohibits insurers from excluding coverage for medically necessary abortions. Governor Roy Cooper vetoed House Bill 10, denying 55,000 North Carolina students and their families access to school choice through opportunity scholarships. Cooper argues the program lacks accountability and diverts $4 billion from public schools, particularly harming rural districts. The bill, which covered multiple topics, would also require sheriffs to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. Republicans who unanimously supported the bill favor its $463 million investment in school choice, while Democrats such as Cooper contends it weakens the public education system. A General Assembly vote to override the veto is expected soon. You can find more of these stories and others like them from across the country at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more on the Center Square Radio Hour.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the Center Square's reporting zeroes in on state authorities publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. The Center Square gives power to the taxpayer by tracking politicians' use of the people's money and demanding transparency from state-run agencies. This is how the Center Square equips you, the American taxpayer, to hold your state government accountable. Sign up now for your state Center Square newsletter at thecentersquare.com.
Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. With more on California's fast food employment numbers, it's David Mastio.
Today we're talking about some things you don't normally hear together. Gavin Newsom writing for FoxNews.com about job growth in California in the $20 minimum wage fast food industry. Tell me what he said and what the facts are, Kenneth.
Hi, David. Gavin Newsom went on to Fox News' website to write an op-ed about how California has added new fast food jobs. Here's a quote from his op-ed. Since the law was enacted, California added 11,000 new jobs in the industry. As of July, our state boasts a historic 750,500 fast food jobs. Newsom is talking, of course, about the $20 an hour fast food minimum wage that went into effect in April of this year and was signed into law at the end of September. Unfortunately, it does not seem like federal data supports this claim. Using the most accurate business-reported employment data from the time the governor signed the $20 per hour fast food minimum wage at the end of September 2023 until March of 2024, which is the most recent point for which the federal finalized payroll survey data is available, says that the fast food employment in the state is down by about 6,000 jobs. I spoke with Rebecca Paxton, who's the director of research and state coalitions at the Employment Policies Institute, which is an organization that does try to limit labor regulations. So you can take a lot of what they might say with a grain of salt. But again, they're reporting on federal data that is publicly available from the Federal Reserve. So you can't really debate that. And what Rebecca said was that the governor is not using adjusted, accurate information. They're using BLS data that does tend to be revised downward. And also, this is not seasonally adjusted. Most economists, when they're studying employment trends, they tend to use what's called seasonally adjusted data that takes into account fluctuations in hiring based on the kind of season, whether it's summer or fall, or maybe it's harvest season. Using seasonally adjusted data gives us sort of a baseline level of comparison. We can accurately gauge how the economy is performing at any given time. And if we use that seasonally adjusted data, California has lost even more jobs than we thought. We see that California lost 6,199 fast food workers for the seasonally adjusted data, not the final survey data that we're talking about. That's only available through March. The seasonally adjusted data is available through July. So California lost 6,199 fast food workers in the first 6 months of 2024, while gaining 3,433 in July, for a net loss thus far this year of 2,766. This is actually an extremely small hiring increase. Generally in July and August, you see huge amounts of employment gain. It's because everyone in the world comes to California in the summer. California is a great place to be. People come from the hot states like Nevada and Arizona. They come from Europe. They come from everywhere. So businesses scale up hiring massively to accommodate for this influx. Remember also, college students are home. Kids are out of school for summer from high school. They need jobs too. So the fact that we had only 3,433 fast food jobs added in July shows that something is seriously wrong with the fast food economy in California. So EPI, the organization I mentioned earlier, they surveyed 200 fast food businesses to research more into what the costs of this minimum wage hike are. So 98% of the restaurants surveyed raised menu prices, 89% reduced employee hours, 73% reduced employee shift pickup or overtime opportunities, and 70% have consolidated or, less fancily, fired staff as a result of the wage law. Those business owners also said 90% said they're less likely to expand in California, 74% there's an increase in the likelihood of their restaurants being shut down, and 67% said the wage law will cost each of their locations at least $100,000 per year.
And you've reported previously there's no private sector job growth overall in California during Gavin Newsom's term in office.
I wouldn't say that there hasn't been any job growth since he took office in 2018, but the California state-funded nonpartisan legislative analyst office did find that the private sector has lost a net 154,000 jobs since September of 2022. Meanwhile, the public and public-supported sector has gained 361,000 jobs since then. This report came out on July 1st, which means that with the economy seemingly entering a recession, those numbers are probably going to get a lot worse. And this means that the state economy has only been held up by vast amounts of government spending and hiring since 2022, with a $47 billion budget deficit that was just narrowly avoided through spending cuts and deferrals. That explosion of public sector and public sector supported hiring could be coming to an end. So if you combine the decline in private sector employment with a shutdown and maybe even cuts in public and publicly supported sector hiring, you are looking at a very bad financial picture for the state of California, which could not be good for the image of the Democratic Party on the national stage.
Kenneth, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Thank you, David and Kenneth. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on the AI-powered app that provides students with answers to their homework, we'll go back to Eliana Kernodle.
As some students return to class this year with statewide or district-implemented cell phone bans, those who still have access to smartphones may be able to use an app powered by artificial intelligence to complete their homework. But that is not the only concern critics have. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, let's start off with just what is this app and what does it do?
Yeah, that's a great question. The app is called Goth AI or Goth Math. In, I think, other markets, kind of globally, it's called Goth Math. And essentially what it allows students to do is take a picture of their homework and then it will give you the answer and the solution. So it's a very powerful, I think, AI-powered tool where it basically, allows you to put in anything, and then it gives you the answer and walks you through the solution. So that, in a nutshell, it's a kind of, I think maybe an easier way. You don't have to input anything into ChatGPT or to Google. That's something that you can obviously do, is go into Google. But I think it gets kind of complicated, say for algebra or physics, when you have very complex formulas. You have, different maybe Greek letters or different kinds of like exponents, that kind of thing. Like you can't it's harder to do that on your keyboard, right? So I think that this makes it really easy just to take a picture, pops out the answer. There you go.
So the app does claim that it has an honor code that it kind of lays out, but there's also its TikTok account, and some of the responses it gives kind of raises some questions. Can you dig into both of those for us?
Right. And I should point out, as that this app is very increasingly popular. And so earlier this year, it was ranked the second most popular education app on the Apple Store, according to Forbes. And that said that the company said that it had over 200 million users, right? So that's a large amount of things, and it's a large amount of hype, right? A lot of people talking about it, and a lot of those people posting about it. Some of those people posting about it were on TikTok, and they seem to be paid. In one case, there was somebody who said #ad, kind of saying that maybe they'd gotten some kind of compensation for the post that they were making about Goth. And really, what it boiled down to is kind of a tale of two apps, right? On its website, Goth is saying things like, "Oh, we do not allow students to use this." Like in a way that violates its institution's honor code, right? So college or, a K-12, like a middle school or a high school. The quote, "We believe every student has the ability to learn through determination and honesty. Aligned with your school's academic integrity policies, this honor code outlines Goth's expectations for your conduct on the platform." And it even tells students to resist the temptation to use Goth in ways that go against your values or school's expectation. And again, success lies in honest study and appropriate support. Make study choices you are proud of! ! So this is their honor code. Then on TikTok, you have Goth sort of saying sort of a different thing to users who are saying that they use it on their tests. So one user said, "I used your app in my end of year test and got full marks." And then Goth said, "Love to see it." The official account. And then again, the honor code says scanning material your instructor has asked you not to and using Goth during a test or exam would constitute misuse of the app. So that is kind of, again, like as I said earlier, it's sort of like a tale of two apps, right? Where on one side, you're like, okay, we don't allow students to do this and you shouldn't do this and you should resist. And then on the other side, on TikTok, more informally with people who use it, students saying stuff like, "My school blocked Goth, but I still use it at home." Another student saying, "This app is so helpful. It helped me with my math quiz and I passed." And then Goth replying to them and saying, "We'd love to see it." Again, a student saying, "Thanks, I got 100% on all my quizzes. Make one for communication arts." And then Goth replies, "Awesome, congrats." And it's kind of, again, sort of odd. Congratulations, using our app, get full marks. And so I think that there's that sort of tension between like a homework helper or tutor and just an app that provides answers for free without actually helping students learn it. And I asked Goth about that tension, and they never responded to my request for comment.
And while cheating is definitely a major issue and a major concern, it's not the only concern surrounding this app. What other issues do critics have?
Yeah, well, one critic, John Pelson, who is a longtime telecommunications expert, he wrote for The Spectator, which is like a London-based magazine. He said that the TikTok bans that different nations have instituted based on concerns about TikTok being owned by a Chinese company, ByteDance, he said that those also apply to Goth because it's owned by ByteDance. So essentially, those are national security concerns that have dominated a lot of different news headlines. There's that pressure on TikTok to sell to a U.S. company, to have that U.S. affiliate based in the United States. Those concerns are about data, not really, the cheating even and different aspects like that. So it's completely separate national security risk, as this expert points out. And the problem there, to Pelson, is that if a Chinese company, based on Chinese law, if a Chinese company has information, that the government can access that information through the Chinese security law, and that they can say it's like a national security concern, and basically get that information of U.S. users who are, even minors. And another concern is that the terms of service allows the company to have access to photo rolls. So it's not just the ones that you can see how that would make sense to have a single picture, but I think it allows access to all photos. And so ostensibly, I think the claim is that, you're giving this company that's owned by a Chinese parent company access to all of your photos that the Chinese government could request. And essentially, if you're talking about it in terms of espionage, that can give you a lot of information about the patterns of life. That there are other concerns of, these kids have parents, these parents have jobs, some of which are interesting to foreign governments, Pelson writes. So, if you can also get that geolocation data, okay, who's using Goth around an embassy or around the Pentagon? And then what other photos do they have? And, those kinds of things, that starts raising national security concerns. And that, is the other concern that experts have around that, because it's owned by ByteDance, right? So this is also the parent company of TikTok. Again, where a lot of the promotion for the app is.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story at chalkboardnews.com.
Thanks to Eliana and Brendan for that update. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. Joining me to dig into the role of Chinese goods in the U.S. economy and the impacts tariffs would have on consumers, it's PhD economist Dr. Orthe Divounguy. Dr. O, you shared a story with me very, very, very early this morning, and you're on Pacific time. I'm on Central time here outside of Chicago. Prices of products brought in from China and the China advantage in the U.S. economy. The story that you shared from the St. Louis Fed, and we've spent a lot of time talking about the St. Louis Fed.
That's research outfit, period.
Yeah.
I mean, look, they're big. They're a great research shop.
Credit where credit's due. I mean, they do give us a lot of information for us to consider. The headline on that story was that the 29% of the products that come directly from China, frankly, are undercutting the U.S. market.
China is the cheapest source for 29% of products to the U.S., more than any other country. Yeah. 29%. I mean, so that's amazing. That's just that's unbelievable. It's like almost one third, right? The cheapest source for almost 1/3 of products that come to the U.S. So I think that's amazing. And I was just thinking about how important that will be if we were to go ahead, because I've heard commentary about if we had some tariffs, then it wouldn't be a big deal because, we just put tariffs on the China products, not the other ones. We just put, but look, the reality is if you do that, right, what does that leave you? It leaves you higher prices on 29% of the products that we import. Right. It's crazy. Right. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, how crazy? I mean, I get the point they're trying to make. We can pick and choose who we're gonna trade with, and we can pick and choose. And if we just stop that one group over there, it's fine. We'll get it from somewhere else. Well, it will be more expensive.
It will be. China's, in the chart that's included in it. And if people would like to read this story, just go to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and you can spend some time with this. It might sort of help shape your thinking about, certainly where the products that we use in the United States, in terms of our trading partners, where the stuff that we buy comes from. And of course, some of this is also upstream. This is not necessarily just a chart that would indicate finished goods. I mean, this is also, materials and things of that nature.
By the way, if you want to replicate it, you go to the 2023 trade data from the U.S. Census Bureau.
There you go. And you can be a junior economist, at home. You should sell that as a kit. Maybe put that on Amazon.
It's free.
And that would, I guess, technically be an American product, right? Because you'd be making it here.
It's free. And maybe we were a little tutorial on how to read the charts.
Yeah, that would probably be worthwhile. But the top trading partners for the United States, I mean, just to kind of level set this for the benefit of people that are okay, so where does our stuff come from? I mean, China is an obvious point. Every label, every tag seems like, at the consumer end, not everyone, but the vast majority of them, in terms of finished goods in particular, says made in China on it. But our number 2 trading partner would be Canada. Number 3 would be Mexico. 4 would be India. And then there's a pretty significant drop off. Germany, Vietnam, Japan, Taiwan, Italy, and South Korea kind of at the top of the list. But, South Korea represents maybe, 3.5%, whereas China's 29%.
But I mean, if you think about it, even Canada and Mexico, just 10% and 8%, right?
Right.
So
right.
It's not even close.
Well, let me ask you this. So what? I mean, for the benefit of our conversation and what it means, so what? I mean, you can't replicate the productivity of a country just because you don't want to do business with that country anymore, or you'd like to minimize your dependence on a particular country for products and materials. But in the grand scheme of things, for the average American, so what?
More expensive shoes and headgear.
Right.
Data processing machinery, whatever that is, textiles, leather, furs, stone and glass, semiconductors.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Man, I don't want my access to furs to be diminished because I'm always out in the market buying furs.
I'm worried about semiconductors there and everything.
Well, that's maybe a little bit more important.
iPhone, laptops, whatever you want. I mean, look, bottom line is it's going up.
I shared with you that video of the CEO from Cantor Fitzgerald about where tariffs make sense and why they make sense, and I thought that was really straightforward.
That was his argument, right? His argument was, we can pick and choose.
That's right.
And it's like, hold on a second, what are you talking about?
And I found that interesting, and the point that he was trying to make was, if there is a particular industry that we want to incubate in the United States, that protecting that industry through tariffs to grow it to the point where it could be viable, not only in the United States, but worldwide, might make sense. And his point was this. That's exactly what every other country in the world is doing, with regard to the industries that they would like to incubate. And this is the truth. You go out in the world and you travel, globally. You don't see too many Ford trucks. You don't see too many Chevy cars. You don't necessarily see the products that you would see in the United States in every country around the world.
You see them. They're just more expensive.
Well, that's why you don't see them, because if it has 100% tariff on it, you're not going to see it. Who wants to pay $80,000 for a minivan made in the United States in a foreign country?
You see them, but they're expensive. And that's why people don't buy them overseas.
Right.
The reality is, I liked the CEO that your video sent me. I did. I listened to it. I paid attention, and I thought his argument made all the sense in the world.
Right.
Until I looked at this report, and I was like, what the heck? Yeah. Anyway, I mean, that's just reality. So in a perfect world, we would get rid of all these trade barriers.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. O. That'll do it for another week of the Center Square Radio Hour. The Center Square Radio Hour is a production of America's Talking Network, produced by Eliana Kernodle. If you missed some of today's show, you can find it at americastalking.com. I'm Chris Krieger on behalf of everyone at Franklin News Foundation. Thank you for listening to the Center Square Radio Hour.